The human mind is malleable to fiction, especially when we consume impactful media at a young age. The ideals and intricate storytelling weave together a lens to make us individually more optimistic or cynical to our real-world views. My anecdotal tale starts off with Fate Stay Night, a series that has shaped the very beliefs and values I still hold to this day. Like many, my journey with Fate began when I plunged myself into visual novels and understood the enduring tale of Shiro Emiya, a boy who wanted to believe in an ideal. This ideal is encouraged, reforged, or casted away through the different three routes. When the battle royale of mythical and historical figures may take the viewer's primary attention, I found my love for the series to be rooted in the self-identity crisis from Fate Stay Night's success. Several sequels, prequels, spin-offs, and more were created that still reference the original cast and its beauty. To note specifically, one of the most expansive areas of Fate has been the adjacent Extraverse, which houses works like Fate Extra, CCC, Last Encore, Extella, and Continued. I bring attention to the focus of ideals because my own subjective taste will always consider the metaphorical war raging within a character. The visuals may be a spectacle to watch, but a show cannot carry itself only on the visuals and still claim to be good. Fate Stay Night's writing details an individual who is hurt and needs emotional healing and an affirmative choice in their future. That is why for me personally, while I enjoy the physical battles, I praise the banter between master and servant, master and master, and servant and servant. Fate Extra's Last Encore is unable to convey that same raw passion of metaphorical war in the character, as we face several roadblocks from the get-go. A protagonist who is in the wrong medium, and a haughty servant who is not meant to ever fall. For beginners, the Holy Grail War is a battle royale of 7 masters and their familiars, termed servants. You clicking on this video must mean you have a semblance of what we are dealing with, so I will avoid the minimal requirements of what you already know. Fate Extra takes a different approach to this traditional battle, one of the key differences being that the Grail War no longer takes place on Earth, but on the Moon, termed the Moon Cell Grail War. Due to a virus outbreak on Earth, mages now titled Spiritron hackers send their data into a supercomputer on the Moon, the Moon Cell. Once on the Moon Cell, instead of a 7-way battle royale, participants must go through a purging process so that the Moon Cell can pick viable candidates and enter a tournament where every week half of the total population is killed. In these weeks, a master must increase their own servant's ability, learn who their enemy's servant is, and find weaknesses to gain an edge. After the participants dwindle down to one winner, the final contestant approaches the core of the Moon Cell, the Angelica Cage, for their final wish. That is the general story format of the game Fate Extra. Now we turn our attention to Fate Extra's Last Encore, where the original story deviates into the bad end path, where the protagonist is unable to kill the final boss, Twice H. Peaceman. Hakuno and servant Nero are unable to beat Twice and his servant Saver, who before his noble phantasm activates. Saver's noble phantasm, the Trakravitan, manipulates the Moon Cell's system, Seraph, and changes the inner structure of the arenas and general rules of the Moon Cell Grail War. The first episode of Last Encore takes place approximately 1,000 years after Hakuno's failure, where the mandatory requirement of killing your opponent is eliminated, and masters are free to live their lives out in peace. Every floor is now set with a floor master, which becomes the boss of the tower-like structure the Moon Cell has now become. In order to bring an end to this endless nightmare, the participant must climb from the bottom floor and reach the top, where the administrator, Saver, awaits his next enemy. 1,000 years takes its toll on an individual's soul, as they are trapped within the Moon Cell. Ideals will be forgotten, swords will rust, and our main character now sets forth in this stagnated reality. Fate Extra Last Encore is an original anime creation, where the head scriptwriter was none other than Kinoko Nasu, the creator of Fate Stay Night. Surely, one would assume that this veteran author would be able to deliver on this monumental story. However, the glaring issue that jumps at us is the difference in mediums. A visual novel writer now making an anime. This issue will be tackled more thoroughly later in this video, but it comes to show one of the structural faults that Last Encore has, and was severely criticized for. While Nasu felt that the Last Encore anime was a passion project of his, I would phrase the entire anime as overly ambitious. In 2015, the release of Fate Grand Order became a pivotal moment in the franchise, as it was a mobile game that allowed easy and enjoyable access for prospective fans. New fans of Fate would play Grand Order and would be interested enough to watch the anime or read the visual novel, thus growing the size of its base. What made this search for knowledge easier was the accessibility of the Fate anime. Fate Zero and Fate Stay Night, ideally the Unlimited Bladeworks route by Ufotable, could easily be found on streaming services like Netflix or Crunchyroll, and a fan could enjoy what the Fate series is. However, we face an issue when we take a look towards the Extraverse. There is a clear roadblock that does not allow fans to easily access the game. Fate Extra never had an anime, and many assumed that Last Encore would be an adaptation of Fate Extra, including myself, but to our dismay, it wasn't. This is one problem that Nasu himself overlooked and did not consider. Fate Extra is a 100+ hour game that takes a significant amount of time to play. Fate Extra has 3 different unique routes with a servant, with its own respective servant, all with their own different 2 alterations with the characters Rin and Rani. The game is considerably long, and to add insult to injury, can get boring. While the character interactions and lore that is uncovered between the characters, the dungeon crawling aspect of the game itself becomes tedious. Persona 5's dungeon crawling is delightful because the monsters we interact with have their own unique size and forms and respective attributes. Fate Extra's dungeon crawling had you face similar looking enemies that never really posed much of a challenge and became boring, tedious, repetitive. Essentially, it was forced grunt work that you had to go through to progress through the story. However, there was an even greater issue that stalled accessibility: the medium in which you could play the game in. Fate Extra is playable on the PlayStation 2, and nowadays we don't really have most of those at our disposal. Then there's the issue of wanting to find an adaptation on your PC, but this proves the point against easy accessibility. An anime is just one finger tap or click away, while a game requires work and at times even a purchase. The average fan can choose to watch gameplay on YouTube, and will still have to devote time out of their day to read the dialogue in the game, as there are no voice lines for the majority of the game. Accessibility and Nasu's naive perspective on the order of watching his creations was what led primarily to the fall of popularity, which was only hampered down with the lackluster plot and at times pretentious writing and dialogue. It pains me to say all this because I'm a huge fan of Type Moon's creations, especially when it comes straight from the author who molded my childhood. Yet, these grave issues cannot be ignored and must be faced head-on. As a formal introduction, my name is Lanza, and I will be your host throughout this series. I have versed myself with Type Moon for the past 7 years of my life. This video is not meant as a cynical critique of Last Encore, but more so as an acknowledgement of where Nasu failed, and what he could have done to do better. Ranging from Tsukihime to Karno Kyokai, from the visual novels and light novels and games, I have enjoyed the many parts of Fate and Type Moon because I love this entire franchise. The arguments I present in this video are not meant or made out of malice, but are made for a reason of care. I hope you take my opinion with a bit of weight, but you are free to disagree or agree with me from here on out. As a sort of primer to this video as we begin, I want us to turn our attention to the public perception of Last Encore, and notice the patterns of criticism we will see throughout this video. I have linked the article below in the description, and would highly suggest you read it to understand the points I am about to make. I'll wait. Are you back? Good. Let's continue. Right off the bat, we are hit with a title that strikes at the work as a whole. Not good for anybody. In the first paragraph, the writer tells the audience that this anime is not a good place to start as you're beginning, and it is here we find the main issue of order watching. Many people believe it is fine to watch the story of Fate Stay Night over Fate Zero because of release order, while others watch Fate Zero first to Fate Stay Night because it is a prequel. Regardless of this order, the viewer will understand the importance of Fuyuki and its characters. Meanwhile, Fate Extra is essential to playing first, then watching Last Encore. Last Encore does not have enough time to pack exposition and description of the Extraverse within only 10 episodes, while Fate Stay Night and Zero enjoy the privilege of 24 hours to work with. The author even goes as far as to focus on Nasu's ability to write an anime script, as some of the dialogue would make sense in the light or visual novel format over the anime. While we have not focused on this aspect too much, it becomes one of the largest wrenches in the works when dealing with the main character of Last Encore. We will save that section towards the later parts of this video. As I mentioned, one of the main intricacies of Fate is seeing the relationships between the characters, and that falls completely flat when dealing with a character who is meant to be a bland cardboard cutout, reminiscent of Zieg from Fate Apocrypha. There is nothing interesting. So how is a viewer supposed to continue watching a show they seem to have less and less attachment towards? The article mentions the general issues that the anime faced since the moment it was created. Last Encore faced tremendous backlash for being the bare minimum of what a Fate story is supposed to be by having a bland main protagonist, a cryptic story, and frustrated finale, scoring from websites like MyAnimeList that rated the show a 6.3, and IMDb, which gave it a 5.3. A stark difference from what some would rate Fate Zero and Unlimited Blade Works. Personally, I would rather like it if you had a degree of prior knowledge of Fate Extra the game and Last Encore the anime, due to the main topic being the differences between the two. If perhaps there was someone who played Fate Extra and watched Last Encore, but came to a very different conclusion, then I would enjoy seeing a difference of opinions. But for me, that is the bare minimum I require from you. This video series will not extend its analysis towards the Extra CCC, the Foxtel manga, and Extella games. We do not want to go through all of the Extraverse, just focus on what we have here and what came out, what is related to one another. Extra and Last Encore are self-contained stories. Last Encore does have 2 CD dramas available that fit with Shinji's girlfriend and her own side adventure, and the 6th floor that establishes a backstory for the war between Rani and Rin. However, I will not cover them. I believe that the CD dramas are just another form of cheating. One's own creation must stand on its own and not rely on the usage of a third-party help. That is to say, the accessibility to find these CD dramas, or at least their transcripts, were harder to find. Your creation is not good if you rely on the CD drama. There will be several videos that I'll create to make this series. Every individual video will not cover each episode, but instead cover the bosses throughout the anime. I would like to condense my videos just around half an hour or a bit less to keep my dear viewers retained, as I know that several individuals cannot stand to watch a video that goes through so much. The following list will be our table of contents that I will stick to. Their order will depend heavily on the interactions Hakuno has as he climbs the moon cell and begins to face off against the individual bosses of each floor. Episode 1, which is the video we currently are on, is our introduction into what you will be expecting to see as I continue to make these videos. However, the title or theme I would like to frame over the second half of this episode is Nasu's intention. We will be going over Nasu's interview before Last Encore was released, and it gives you the chance to see where he went wrong in the execution of the anime and what should have been a stronger word of guidance. It will act as a way to understand why Last Encore is the way it is, or why his recommendation on entering Last Encore was incorrect. Episode 2 will begin on the preliminary story between Hakuno as he enters the Tower Moon Cell. Hakuno is an average student at Tsukimihara Academy who is friends with his main man Shinji Mato and his own respective girlfriend Misawa Mari. In this episode, we note the glaring issues of a main protagonist, who would fit better in a light novel rather than an anime. The introduction of characters like Leonardo create a deviation of what we know prior to Last Encore, and how different the story has and will mold from Fate Extra the game. Episode 3 will focus on the episodes that take place on the first floor, Shinji's domain with his servant Ryder. We will come to understand the stark differences between the little boy we killed in Fate Extra to the matured governor we have now confronting us. Nasu intended for the 1,000 years not to just deteriorate a character's will, but to show the mental shift these characters are forced to take as their lives will repeat for years, trapped in the moon cell. Episode 4, which is easily my second favorite boss in the anime, is Dan Blackmore and his hunter Archer. The characters in this segment will portray the attribute of Rust. A man whose desire was to reach the wish-granting device is now trapped from his duty, unable to protect the family who employed him. As Episode 3 showed a character maturing, Episode 4 will show the degradation of a knight's honor. Episode 5 will house a creature of nightmares, a storytelling boss who is reminiscent of the same horrors found in Tsukihime and Kara no Kyokai. The characters Alice and Servant Nursery Rhyme come to show the mental chaos that inflicts this now mutilated creature. I found myself loving this boss and its entire screen time. At its core, the episodes that house Nursery Rhyme are exactly what Nasu wanted to demonstrate to the audience, to show what happens after a protagonist fails and the world becomes a what-if scenario. I would even argue that Last Encore reached its height at this point, which only means that the scenarios that follow after left a sour taste in one's mouth. Episode 6 is where we begin to see Last Encore run down in quality. From the start, we have the fourth floor entirely skipped for some ominous reason. I'll explain why exactly that is, and the answer I have for you is not one you'll like. The characters that roam on the higher floors are only cocoons of former characters, only being used for their faces for the sake of familiarity. Julius B. Harway and his servant Li Shuen, now corrupted, are thrown into the anime only as rabid dogs. We barely spend time on the fifth floor, and begin our journey up to the finale. The glaring issue in this scenario is the fact that our main protagonist's inner thoughts that would ideally suit a light novel format come off as plot armor, as he is reminiscent of an edgy anime character who pulls an ability out of thin air. Episode 7 is yet another scenario that is plagued by Nasu's inability to fill in the details. Yes, the rule of show don't tell is important, but there needs to be a proper way to explain why two fan-favorite characters are the way they are. Rin and Ronnie, engaging in a war on the 6th floor, only tells the audience that there has been a conflict for these hundreds of years, yet we do not enjoy the payoff of seeing it. For an anime watcher only who has never played the game, they are left in a confused mess. However, just as I stated in the prior episode, there is reason for the lack of explanation, and once again, the answer is disappointing. Episodes 8, 9, and 10, or more so the finale, will wrap up my series as the prior episodes were based on the 10 anime episodes that were released. These 3 episodes will in a way mirror the 3 individual OVAs that were released after the 10 episode series. Episode 8 will focus on Leonardo B. Harway's character and his relationship to Gawain. Episode 9 will take a look at Twice H. Peacement and his servant Saver. And Episode 10 will act as our conclusion and final say on our beloved characters and bid a fond farewell to this anime that will fall into obscurity due to its lack of success, an unfortunate but fitting end. I've laid our structure for the upcoming weeks, and I hope you stick around to watch the videos. One final noteworthy mention. I hope that you remain interested enough to leave a like and subscribe. I enjoy making these types of videos for fun, and it makes me happy that someone is listening on the other end. Any comments would be appreciated, even if you are to disagree with me. Moving along, I believe we have our first part to cover within this video series, and should act as the perfect introduction to analyze the faults of Last Encore, Nasu's intention. The intent of the writer is important, because it can act as a guide in entering their work of fiction. Nasu's intent on the creation of Last Encore is critical to understanding why characters acted in certain ways. He wanted to enjoy the freedom of writing a what if the main character failed scenario. The anime is not meant to be a carbon copy of the original plot of Extra, but find the beauty of the differences within each character. He wants us to see these differences and become shocked by how our beloved characters are so different now. Nasu has shown himself to be a competent writer. His storytelling and themes that he was able to portray through Fate Stay Night is more than enough to show the audience that he has a grasp on the entire what-ifs scenario. Essentially, every route in Fate Stay Night is, what is Shiro blank the ideal of the hero of justice? He has dealt before with the art of different events in the same situation. Therefore, the extraverse, being changed after 1,000 years and changing his characters, should not be that hard and within his grasp. The problem is that Nasu had hours of time in the visual novel to properly construct Shiro Emiya, while the anime was only condensed into 10 episodes, with the inclusion of 3 OVAs. This is one of the main weaknesses of light novels that are adapted into anime. We lose the perspective of the characters and must instead rely on visual cues for the audience. While Last Encore is not an adaptation, it was pushed by Nasu himself that it was possible to view the anime first, then play the game later, which is incorrect. Last Encore is now hampered with 3 issues. The fact that it is an anime that loses the benefit of a much-needed inner dialogue, a time crunch on how many episodes can make us attached to an emotionless character, and finally, the incorrect order that was given to us to view the Fate Extra material. The main point over this section is to focus on one particular interview he had before the release of Last Encore, and I believe it became the fatal flaw of his creation. I understand better than most that the Fate franchise was in a state of expansion between 2015 through 2017. New Fate anime, games, and series were being created after the rampant support of Fate Grand Order, and the money that was flowing into the company. Nasu saw that an influx of new fans should delve deeper into Fate as a whole, even though its extended works like Tsukihime and Kar no Kyokai. Last Encore would be his method of introducing the fans who were already familiar with the story of Fate Stay Night into the expansive Extraverse. However, we have already stated that the entry level into Fate Extra is difficult because of its accessibility. That is why I believe that Nasu didn't even understand how his own fan base would work. The following interview was found online, or one can just go to Beastlayer and find a translation. Through Last Encore, I tried to make it something that feels different, depending on whether you know the premise. For the people who will watch this anime as their first extra experience, I want this to be the starting point where they become interested in the original game and the comics. Parentheses, 5 volumes in total, on sale from Kadokawa. End parentheses. For the people familiar with the original game, I want them to go, "What?" at the differences. So people can have fun playing extra after watching the anime, and people can have fun watching the anime after playing the game. I hope we made something that can be enjoyed both ways. While the intention was pure, Nasu failed to realize that Fate Extra, his own work, is substantially harder and ultimately boring to get into. Many criticize Fate Extra for not only being tedious dungeon crawling, but also on the progression of the story. It becomes a repeating machine of meeting one new servant and master, beating them, then repeating 6 more times. I'm confident in saying that there were a few fans who watched Last Encore then either played or watched Fate Extra the game. The reason being that a majority of fans found Last Encore to be boring or confusing, as we saw in the article above. Last Encore is a great inside joke. When you play the game, you are in on the joke, and you can see the payoff when watching the anime. However, when you only watch the anime, essentially when you hear the punchline but have no setup, so you're just sitting there awkwardly, not really understanding the point of the punchline. Last Encore can only properly function as being remotely good after understanding the backstory of the characters, and then watching their differences because you know of their weaknesses and their progression. The anime then acts as a surface level look into the changes of these characters. The anime should not be watched first, as you essentially know nothing about Fate Extra. From here, we have a few filters to take in as we progress through the different story arcs of each master and their servant to accompany my episode series. The first thing to understand is that this is a what-if scenario, where most of the entertainment is rooted from the differences of the masters and their servants. We also know that the anime will face issues of inner dialogue for the main character, where Hakuno's character lacks the ability to express his thoughts to the audience. I do understand that there is no section devoted to Hakuno and his servant Nero, but I will do that explanation towards the final episode of this series to show if our main character grew at all. Meanwhile, throughout the episodes, I will continually reference any point of interest for the two, as ideally they should be the characters we shine a light on the most. The main characters of every Fate installment should be unique, memorable. Hakuno has suffered the same treatment as C to being watered-down heroes that only mimic the original Fate protagonist Shiro Emiya. This anime faces the problem of being limited by its running time to the point that Nasu had to write out certain characters or fill in the gaps with additional CD dramas, which in my opinion is just bad storytelling. We will begin episode 2 with the preliminary story before entering the rusted tower of the Moon Cell, before the world became corrupted, and where Hakuno finds himself with Shinji and Amari, on the eve of total deletion from the Moon Cell. I hope you're ready for an adventurous ride as we begin our dissection into Fate Extra's last Encore.